Good morning, happy Sunday. I am back with another nutrition lesson for you, except it's not really a nutrition lesson. We're going to be talking about mindset today, and you will be able to apply this to nutrition, to training, to life. We're just going to cover it all. So I want you to think about a habit that you have or habits that you have when it comes to nutrition and training. It might be grocery shopping, tracking macros, it might be meal prep, it might be packing snacks for work or school. It might be training 5 times a week, watching Katie's recaps of the sessions. It might be taking creatine, whatever it is, whatever comes to mind. All of these habits add up to what you refer to as your routine. And you've built this routine over time based on a ton of different factors, but mostly your schedule and your preferences, your responsibilities. And the whole goal is to achieve your goals with this routine, whatever they might be. So now I want you to think about a time when you have struggled with either establishing a new habit or maintaining your routine. I was talking to a TWK client or athlete earlier on IG, and I had put up a story that basically mentioned that I always get up early because it's the only time of day that I can get work done. And so I use that time in the morning before my kids wake up to either train or to coach. And she was like, how do you do that? Like, I cannot do it no matter what. And she went on to explain, like, she'll wake up on Monday morning and press the snooze button and sleep through alarm. And then Tuesday, she's like, well, I already slept through my alarm on Monday. And then it just kind of snowballs from there, where she never ends up waking up early because she can't get the ball rolling, So we see this scenario all the time as coaches. This is a cognitive distortion known as polarization. So sometimes you hear it referred to as black and white thinking or all or nothing mindset. In today's lesson, I'm going to talk about what it means, and we're going to walk through a few scenarios where it comes up often, especially with nutrition and training. And as always, I'm going to teach you a few strategies to start overcoming this cognitive distortion. So this lesson is appropriate for all backgrounds, all goals, and we're going to get started. So what exactly is a cognitive distortion? A cognitive distortion they're basically just biased perspectives of ourselves or the world around us. Irrational thought patterns. And what happens is sometimes our brains just make assumptions based off of what it already knows. So I want you to think of it like a filing cabinet, like at a library. Anytime you come across a situation, your brain is going to pull out a filing cabinet and pull out whatever information it might know about the situation already. And it's really like a phenomenal advantage when it comes to being human, specifically in survival settings, right? We can identify things that are dangerous, like maybe don't walk close to that cliff or don't touch that hot stove. We can attract spouses. We can find solutions to problems that we have already encountered in the past. But this does have its downsides, okay? So sometimes you'll come across a situation and your brain will pull out that filing cabinet and make an assumption based on the information it already has. And because there's some like sort of correlation there, right? So in English, we have this phrase, correlation does not equal causation. If you are fluent in another language and you have a phrase that's similar to that, I would love to hear it. Drop it in the comment section below. Meaning sometimes there will be some sort of a similarity or correlation between two factors, and our brains will immediately draw a conclusion or a connection and then draw a conclusion between them. So sometimes these conclusions are just overly simplistic, but sometimes they're just straight up wrong or false. There's similarities between the factors, but your brain draws a conclusion that in reality is just not logical and it doesn't work in your favor. So we're going to talk about a common scenario that I see often as a nutrition coach. I had a client actually reach out to me earlier this week, and I was like, this is the perfect example for my lesson. on all or nothing thinking, because she reached out to me. She uses tracking macros as a tool to help her accomplish her goals, and her life is just like money, has just been very stressful, lots of responsibility, lots of stuff on her plate. And last week she had a difficult time tracking. She tracked a few days, and we used that data, and we talked about some different tracking strategies that she could implement to make tracking easier. But then it just kind of went downhill from there, and she couldn't track for many reasons. And she reached out to me because she was like, okay, on Monday, I'm going to track all day long. I'm just going to track everything I eat. And she tracked nothing she ate on Monday. And then Tuesday, the same thing happened. So she reached out to me on Tuesday night and was like, I need help. Like, this is not working, and I feel awful. So what is going on here, right? Not only did she stop tracking, she wasn't implementing any of the mindfulness tools or strategies that we've been working on when it comes to her nutrition choices. Polarization in a nutshell, okay? This is all or nothing thinking. Her brain presented her with two polar opposite options. She could track every piece of food that she ate all week long, or she could track nothing. She could practice the nutrition strategies that we've been working on, or she could practice nothing. And not only did her brain present her these polar opposite options, but it also presented her with two outcomes. She would either pass or she would fail. So instead, we want to focus on the spectrum between these two polar opposites, kind of like the gray space, the middle, the in-between. Instead of tracking everything or tracking nothing, there were a lot of other possibilities, right? And I talked to her a little bit prior. Before the week prior, we talked about some different strategies that she could try out. She could have tracked Tuesday, even though she didn't track Monday, right? She could have tracked partial days. She could have tracked meals. She could have tracked protein only. She could have tracked scannable items only. She could have tracked via food journal. There were options. But I want you to think of horse racing. I know, but just hang on and follow me for a second. There's a point to be made. And I am the queen of analogies, and this is how I'm going to make this point. The narrative playing in her head or in your head is the horse. It reacts. That's what it does best, right? But you're the jockey, and you can bring sort of an elevated level of thinking to these reactions and steer them in the right direction. That's the work with cognitive distortions. You want to observe your reactions, collect the information, and then steer yourself in a better direction, especially a more advantageous direction that's more aligned with your goals. So, as a side note, I'm not an equestrian specialist, but this really reinforces the idea that we have kind of two lines of thinking, that one's more reactive and that one's more elevated. And they work in unison, but sometimes one takes over before the other. We'll take this second scenario that her brain presented her, which was she could track macros or she could track nothing. These are the two polar opposites, right? There's a spectrum in between these choices. You don't have to track your macros to be mindful of your nutrition choices or feel good or even achieve your goals. I never teach tracking macros as a standalone nutrition approach because it's just a tool. And what happens if you can't use that tool? Imagine if you were like a carpenter and you were like, hey, you cannot use this hammer. What the heck else are you supposed to use? There needs to be other options, right? There are many other tools and strategies to fall back on, but also you should be using them in unison with tracking macros, because this is what I see. People will track macros, then they can't track macros for whatever reason. They're traveling, things are stressful, it's just not working for them, and then they have nothing. They have no other tools in their toolbox. So in this scenario, she could have focused on balancing her meals, like fats, carbs, and proteins in each meal. She could have eaten more consistently throughout the day. She was like skipping meals and whatnot. So really focusing on those three main meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. She could have rated her hunger, satiation, and satiety signal. She could have been implementing just mindful eating exercises and strategies like turning off screens when you're eating or putting your fork down in between bites. You and I both know, as we're talking about this in a third person perspective, that her conclusion or assumption that there were only these two options was just illogical, right? But at the same time, we're also human. We have empathy and compassion because we have also been there. We know, right? She knows, but she doesn't know in the moment. It can be hard to identify in the moment these illogical thought patterns, right? Before the negative consequence actually occurs. What happens is that the negative consequence is usually the cue for the frustration. So when she reached out to me not because she was like, oh, hey, I've noticed some polarized thinking. She reached out to me because she felt like crap. She, felt out of control. She had very sporadic hunger signals, blood sugar. She was making like impulsive emotional choices when it comes to food. She just didn't feel good. She was like, that was her cue to reach out to me, which I coached her to do, right? If you need help, you need to come and get support. Put your hand up. So that's what she did. But when she reached out to me, again, she wasn't like, hey, I have been experiencing some polarized thinking. She said, how can I get back to tracking? This isn't working, and tracking fixed this, so I need to focus on tracking. But again, the work with these cognitive distortions is to slow down and identify the assumption that your brain is making. So for her, it was, if I don't track, I'm going to fail. Or if I track, I can either track or I don't track anything at all. And then consider the options on the spectrum. Tracking, as in tracking your macros in an app like Chronometer or MyFitnessPal, wasn't the best option for her. Like, we gave it a go. I even talked through different strategies that she could implement to make it easier for her, but it was very clear that that was not the right tool for the job. She had a lot on her plate, and really no strategy was going to make things easier for her. So instead, we slid a little bit further down the spectrum and leaned on other strategies and tools. She switched her focus to balancing her 3 main meals out. She took photos of them, kind of like a food journal. So we were able to keep the same accountability that we got from tracking macros in this food journal. Except we made it a lot easier, right? She didn't have to weigh her food. She didn't have to log all of these separate items into things. All she had to do was pull out her phone and take a picture. So that kept the accountability, and we also kept the benefits, right? We still have quote unquote data to look back on and make adjustments if need be. So we see this sort of polarized thinking in training as well. I'm going to talk about 2 different ways, 2 different scenarios that we see it. The most common one, especially with newbies, is they will start training and they'll be like, okay, the program is 5 days a week, so I'm going to go to the gym 5 days a week from 0. Not the most realistic goal in the first place, but maybe they wake up on Monday and sleep through their alarm, and they don't make it to the gym, and so Tuesday comes around and they're like, well, I already didn't make Monday, and so I'm not going to hit my 5-day-a-week goal, and so I'm not going to train at all. Polarized thinking, right? All or nothing. For athletes that already have a more established routine, you're showing up consistently at the gym, and that's not really an issue for you, you might experience polarized thinking in a different way. This was me. This ruled my life. So I struggle with it more in CrossFit, but I'm going to apply it in a TWK fashion. So maybe you set the goal of progressively overloading your sets and reps, and you're like, I'm going to progressively overload every set. Not the best goal. Or I'm going to progressively overload my sets, but I'm only going to progressively overload weights. So every time you approach the barbell or every time you go to the gym, you're putting more weight on the bar. There's a number of reasons why this polarized kind of line of thinking is problematic. One, you're banking your success on an unrealistic goal or expectation, right? No athlete is going to be able to progressively overload every single set, especially via weight, for the rest of their lives. Okay, you're just setting yourself up to be really disappointed. Two, our progress is dependent on balancing appropriate stimulus with biofeedback. So if you're only focusing on the stimulus and you're not focused on the biofeedback, you're missing half the equation, right? Biofeedback likely won't be in check, which means that you're not going to be able to positively adapt from training. By biofeedback, I could mean like stress, I could mean soreness, energy. If you, people really understand soreness the best. If you work out and you can't open your arms because you tried the new bicep accessory work, tricep accessory work, and you just went ham on it, and then the next day you're like, I cannot open my arms, I'm so sore. If that prevents you from training in the future, biofeedback just isn't in check, right? So maybe you can make some changes to your approach next time, like pulling back on the weight that you used or the amount of volume that you did. The third reason why this polarized mindset can be problematic is that it can lead to overreaching, which can lead to injury and plateaus, okay? So all of this just leads to disappointment and frustration. Instead, you want to look at other options on the spectrum. You can progressively overload in other ways, right? You can progressively overload reps, tempo, holds, form. We always forget about form, but literally you could stay with the same weight and just dial in form over the 3 weeks that we complete a cycle, and that still counts as progressive overload. You can focus on identifying your biofeedback signals, and you can focus on picking and choosing the sets that you reach on. There's a huge range or spectrum of things that you could focus on in order to continue to see the gains that you want to see in training. So one of the most telltale signs of polarized thinking is your thoughts are really, really fast, okay? Your brain it's drawing conclusions quickly, and oftentimes you'll feel trapped between a good scenario and a not so good scenario, right? That like, I'm gonna pass or I'm gonna fail. So if you think you are struggling with this cognitive distortion, if you struggle with polarized thinking, all or nothing mindset, work on observing and identifying your thought patterns. This is really hard to do. So like I said, you want to really focus on how it feels in your body. Are your thoughts really fast? Are you really frustrated? Do you feel like you're only going to pass or you're only going to fail? That's a good sign that there might be some polarized thinking going on. And then I encourage my clients, I also do this myself, to press what I call the pause button. Like literally just like a red button, imaginary button, slam the pause button, and everything around you just kind of freezes and you can think through things a little bit more. So none of this is an emergency. Once we press the pause button, you can consider kind of where your thoughts are and think about your line of thinking. It's hard work, okay? I'm not gonna lie. Sometimes the hardest part of it is just recognizing that your thoughts are really fast, that you feel trapped, that you're frustrated, and that pressing the pause button. That's a win. Like if in the first month of working on this, you just get to pressing the pause button, that's a huge win. Like clap for yourself because it's hard work. Beyond that, after you press the pause button, then you can think about kind of what assumptions you're making, okay? And then consider the spectrum between those two options. The biggest thing to remember as you're working through all of this is that it requires self-compassion, okay? You're going to make mistakes. You're going to struggle. You're going to experience polarized thinking and then experience the negative consequence to it and then be like, why didn't I identify it when it was happening? That's normal. You're human. And it takes trial and error over time to really learn about yourself and move forward in a way that feels good and that creates positive change. So that's all or nothing mindset. Hopefully this was helpful. But yeah, the biggest thing, like I said, is to just be compassionate towards yourself and give yourself room and time and space to make these mistakes. Really focus on those fast thoughts and pressing the pause button, because that's like the hardest part, is just recognizing it when you're in the moments. Because once you're already experiencing those negative consequences, the moment has already passed. And at this point, you have already kind of suffered. You can prevent that suffering from just playing out uncontrolled by pressing the pause button as soon as you notice the signs. So again, hopefully that was helpful. If you have any questions, please drop them in the comment section below. If you have any requests for future topics that you would like to see covered, whether it's nutrition or mindset, body image, whatever it is, please, I'm always open to them. They're actually really helpful, and I love feedback. So thank you to everyone who reaches out to me and just lets me know how helpful these sessions are, and how they have helped you create that positive change. It means a lot, and I appreciate it. Okay, so I will see you next week. I hope you have a great rest of your weekend.